Thank you, TK. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I think let's get on to the business end of the conference. And it is my privilege to introduce the first panel, which is going to discuss and debate on the India and the regional economic outlook. As part of the panel, we have 4 distinguished members, and I will quickly introduce each one of them before handing it over to the moderator. First up, it's my privilege to introduce Dr. K.V. Subramaniam, who is the Chief Economic Advisor to the Government of India. He is one of India's leading expert on economic policy, banking, and corporate governance, a PhD from Chicago Booth, and a top-ranking IIT and IIM alumnus. He has authored the path-breaking economic survey that it can commence ethical wealth creation for a prosperous India. The 2019 economic survey was authored by Dr. Subramaniam, which laid out the strategic blueprint for India to become a $5 trillion economy by generating a virtuous cycle where private investment, wage, and employment growth, as well as consumption, feed into each other. Dr. Subramaniam is on leave from the prestigious Indian School of Business, where he is a professor of finance. He has previously served on several expert committees. If I start naming them, I'll be here for a while. He was also named the ISB's inaugural Alumni Endowment Research Fellow in 2014. In his previous roles, Dr. Subramaniam has served as the finance faculty at several business schools. He obtained his MBA and his PhD in financial economics at the University of Chicago Booth School of Business under the advice of Professor Zingales and Professor Raghuram Rajan. More importantly, his own students have now gone on to become faculty at some of the world's top leading institutions. With that, welcome Dr. Subramaniam. I also take this opportunity to introduce Sonal Verma. Sonal is the Chief Economist, India, Asia, excluding Japan, for Nomura. She's based in Singapore, and her responsibilities include analyzing key economic trends in the region and publishing in-depth reports on the economy as part of Nomura's Asia Global Markets Research Team. She also manages a team of regional economists, having joined Nomura in October of 2008 from Lehman Brothers, where she also served as the India economist. Sonal has been top rated for the last many years by several institutions for her economic expertise in the Asian markets, and has previously worked as an economist at ICICI Bank and CRISIL. She also was a member of the Indian government's working group to construct the Index of Industrial Production, and her views are frequently sought by the media and think tanks. Finally, Sonal holds a bachelor in economics from the Delhi University and is a master's in economics from the Delhi School of Economics. So welcome, Sonal. We are thrilled to have you join us on this panel. Third on the panel is Tanvi Gupta, who is the Chief Economist at UBS for India. Tanvi Gupta Jain joined UBS in April 2017 as the Chief India Economist, prior to which she held a similar role at Macquarie for almost 7 years. Tanvi has been rated as India's top-ranked economist in 2020 by the Asia Institutional Investor Survey. She has covered the Indian economy for more than a decade and has built a franchise based on thematic research and comparing India's economy with those of the emerging markets. Previously, she's worked with Morgan Stanley as well as with ICICI Bank. Tanvi too has a degree in economics from the Delhi University and also has a master's in economics from the Delhi School of Economics. Welcome, Tanvi, and we're thrilled to have you join us as well. And lastly, I would like to introduce the moderator for this session, which is Ruchi Bhatia. Ruchi is the Deputy Chief of Bureau for New Delhi for the Times Network. She has 10 years of experience in journalism and has been associated with the Times Network for over 6 years. She has been leading the economic policy and finance coverage for ET Now and has broken some of the biggest stories in the banking and financial world. She obviously interviews top policymakers on news and events, and she anchors the primetime news on ET Now's leading show, India Tonight, and conducts debates and discussions on the most important news stories of the day. So she's going to sort of switch her evening slot with the afternoon slot that she's going to do for us. So over to you, Ruchi. Ruchi, you're on mute. If you can unmute yourself.
Am I audible?
Excellent, Ruchi. Over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Debash. COVID-19, of course, has upended all aspects of life and has thrown a new set of challenges as well as opportunities, both for the government as well as India Inc. For the government, it's been a year of uncertainties, navigating through the unknowns, given the course and the duration of the pandemic, while for businesses, the year 2020 has been the one that has been defined by sustainability, better risk management, how businesses have pivoted during these times, or should I say outmaneuvered uncertainties. And let's talk about that in detail with this eminent panel that is now joining us. Of course, what can be done in terms of policy response. We will be discussing that in the next 1 hour or so. Joining us now is the Chief Economic Advisor, K.V. Subramaniam, as well as Sonal Verma of Nomura and Tanvi Gupta of UBS as well. Mr. Subramaniam, let me first begin by asking you about your assessment for the economy. Back in the month of April, 14 out of the 16 indicators were in the red. Now things are beginning to look up. As many as 10 to 11 indicators are showing a recovery of sorts. I want to ask you and begin by asking you actually, how sustainable is this recovery? Because a lot of people were up until now talking about the fact that this was pent-up demand. In your assessment, in your assessment of where things are headed with respect to the economy, where are we at this point of time in the month of October?
Very good afternoon, all the participants and viewers, and thanks, Ruchi. I think, as I said, as I had mentioned after the Q1, GDP numbers, when the high frequency indicators that we track every week, we track almost 60 indicators, in my office. It was suggesting that there was a good recovery that was happening, especially in the manufacturing sector. I'd mentioned, for instance, things like e-way bills, the cement production, steel production, the railway freight, power consumption. These are typically the ones that we track. I think since I had made that assessment, things have, I think, improved. If you look at the PMI, the Purchasing for manufacturing, is at a 7-year high in the month of September. I think that is very good. Also, the services sector PMI actually is 49.8, so almost at 50. I would say that the manufacturing sector, I think the recovery is looking very good. In fact, we are back to pre-COVID, not only pre-COVID levels, but even levels compared to last year. Even Y on Y, I think we are doing quite fine. Services, especially those that are affected more by social distancing, still like hotels, tourism, travel, etc. Will continue to be to be something that we actually, I don't think we're back to full throttle yet. What I still maintain though, Ruchi, and I think through times that when things were not looking that great, and now when things are looking great, I would still maintain that the uncertainty remains. We are in a period of extreme uncertainty because of the pandemic, and if you just look at, for instance, the way growth forecasts have changed, even accounting for the herding that often happens among analysts, there's been a lot of change in the forecast Now some people are saying maybe we need to revise upwards. That just reflects the extent of uncertainty. So I would say, oh, I would say I would be cautiously optimistic. Things are looking good. I think I will definitely, append by saying that the medium to long-term prospects look, excellent, especially on the basis of many reforms that are being done, and we can talk.
Absolutely. In fact, I will be talking about and touching about that reforms in just a while. But Sonal, if I can, I can come to you. What's been your own assessment? Yesterday, we had the World Bank in their forecast. They've said that the situation in India now is much worse than we've ever seen before. Do you concur with that view, and where things are at this point of time, when many other indicators, including auto sales, including toll collections, e-way bills, are now seeming to point towards the fact that things may be getting back to normal?
Well, I think, Ruchi, it depends on which sector you're looking at. From an aggregate perspective, I mean, I would agree with the chief economic advisor. Clearly, from the lows of April, there has been a swift recovery. We do actually track an aggregate business resumption index, which basically, let's say, 100% as normal pre-pandemic. On average, that is back to about 80 to 83% right now. So you're not back at normal, but you're getting there. But there is clearly a divide between different sectors in terms of there's been a swift recovery, yes, in the durables part of the segment, in the manufacturing segment, but the services are still lagging behind. I would say that one needs to be cautious about how things play out going forward. Even countries that have done very well in containing the pandemic have seen the infection cases resurge. So while one does hope that the COVID-19 cases stay in check, that remains a source of uncertainty. Second, I think the informal sector in India is not aptly captured in the indicators that we are all tracking. And therefore, to the extent of damage for the small and medium enterprises or workers in the informal sector beyond the support measures we have provided, I think it's really hard to actually make a concrete assessment on that. And the risk, therefore, does remain that the consumer is a bit more cautious and saves more relative to spending from a more medium-term perspective. And third, really from the balance sheet perspective, in fact, the World Bank itself has done some analysis on the impact that pandemics have on emerging markets. And they find that pandemics actually do lead to lower potential growth because there is an adverse impact on both capital formation and productivity. So I think that remains a challenge going forward. So yes, it's been a V-shaped recovery. I think the path ahead is still uncertain, both from a cyclical as well as from a more longer-term perspective.
Absolutely, Tanvi. Given the fact that the path ahead, in front of us is still uncertain, we're talking about a V-shaped recovery. I want to understand from you, if you talk to businesses at this point of time, they say that, there is, of course, recovery coming in. It's much more faster than what was anticipated. In fact, just yesterday, Anand Mahindra said that their own businesses are constrained by, due to lack of capacity, lack of inventory, as well as inadequate component supplies as well. So I want to understand from you, for businesses, how long before we get back to normal? But and on the other hand, for the informal sector that we're not really able to assess so far, in a proper way, what is the way forward for them in terms of how long before we see the informal sector also reaching its max potential? I think we've lost the line with Tanvi. I I think we've lost the line with Tanvi. We'll try to get back to her. But, Mr. Subramaniam, if I can come to you, the policy bias, now seems to be moving towards, from repair to growth. The RBI governor today also said that he's expecting that in Q4 of this year, things will get back to normal. We will see growth in the positive territory. Many believe he's a little too optimistic. You yourself are talking about a V-shaped recovery that we may see. Does that mean that probably by the end of the year, we may be ending in the positive territory?
Ruchi, I've always maintained that this is a period of extreme uncertainty. I think there may be a good likelihood that things will be better, going forward. But I would also mention that we're still not out of the pandemic, and back in March, we had looked at a lot of the research that was done on the Spanish flu episode. The Spanish flu episode, for instance, actually lasted almost 2 years, and that is why, in fact, we took into account the fact that this may not be a 3-4 month episode, and we may be in for the long haul. I think till the vaccine does not come about, the period of uncertainty will remain. I think that said, what I will say is 2 important aspects. On average, as we are seeing, I think the unlock is really helping in in the manufacturing side, and things are and I wanted to actually just lend some color to what Sonal was saying. While World Bank's estimation of future growth is definitely affected by the impact on productive capacity, etc. I think what is very important to keep in mind and take into account is that the productive capacity is enormously impacted by structural reforms. And India is the only country which has done those reforms. I think it's important to keep in mind that some of the reforms that people have been talking about for 3 decades, labor reforms, for instance, were a conditionality that had come with the IMF loan in 1991, back when I was in school, and maybe Sonal and Tanvi actually were in their primary grades, and those labor reforms have happened now. Agricultural reforms, the freedom that was not there for the farmer, since independence, every other producer had it, and now, so I think it is extremely critical that when we talk about productivity, that we actually factor that in. And a related point that I would mention is eventually, the output growth, potential output is affected by the long-term demand and supply, capabilities of the economy. And that is something that was only affected because of the financial sector. So overall, I think the real side continues to be very good. So I think this is very important to keep in mind. The medium to long-term perspective looks very good. I would say we need to focus on the short run right now and create that bridge to the medium to the long term.
Right. So what is the short-term pill going to be for the economy? Tanvi, if you can come in on that. We've lost your line in between. Now we're seeing many of the big businesses saying that, we're kind of trying to come back to normal. Yesterday, Anand Mahindra also said that their business was constrained due to capacity, lack of inventory, and inadequate component supplies. But they're happy the fact that, at least business is coming back. They've sold out their hotels, they've sold out their cars as well as tractors as well. But on the other hand, for the informal economy, the impact has been far, far more. So how long really before we get back to the pre-COVID levels?
If I look in, hi Ruchi, so if I look in terms of how the macro can shape up, our view is that supply side conditions have eased incrementally. So I would say back to pre-COVID levels, if I compare where we are right now, we could be back to 80-85% of the pre-COVID level. However, the bigger challenge, as we believe, is the demand side momentum. And where the problem looks like to be more structural. One, obviously there is a COVID uncertainty. People are not sure how long the COVID uncertainty is going to last. And the structure of India's employment, only 17% of the population works in an organized or a formal setup. 83% of the population works as a self-employed, casual laborer, or in other small works, where the income uncertainty more related to reduction in the jobs or even, reduction in income levels sustain very, very high. So India is a consumption-driven economy. 60% share in GDP is consumption, and you need consumers to bounce back. And in a scenario where there's so much uncertainty related to COVID, and second, you're not sure how sustainable your income levels are, not only today, but even 12 months down the line, it is very difficult, I see, for that demand to come back. So in terms of how macro could shape up, obviously, I think we have seen the worst in the June quarter. Our estimates are seeing, especially the UBS Financial Conditions Index, which is more like a lead indicator on how the economy could pan out. It is definitely showing signs of improvement. It consistently has been improving from the month of June. So things are definitely improving on the ground. But what I can see right now is that a lot of this improvement is one, supply side getting eased because you open up the economy. Second, there is a pent-up demand which is visible, whether it's durables, which Sonal was mentioning, or other high-frequency data, which are showing that the pent-up demand is visible. My bigger concern is post-October, November, once that pent-up demand is done, your festive season is done, how is this demand going to sustain if it is not backed by higher income levels? So that is the biggest concern which I have, because we are not like US or UK where there is an income unemployment insurance or a large chunk of population can do work from home. We have opened up the economy, we are opening up everything, but people are shying away from going to work. People prefer to do work from home where possible, and people who don't have a choice maybe don't have a job also right now. So
Absolutely.
my bigger concern going forward is one, after this momentum which we are seeing on the ground, maybe last till October or maybe November till the first week till you have Diwali, post that I find it very hard. So the pace of economic recovery is going to be very gradual. Yes, we need much more credible fiscal policy, and Dr. Subramaniam is here. And while we have seen monetary policy have been quite proactive, I think RBI has done all it takes, whether it's pumping in liquidity, cutting interest rate, providing some kind of support to the financial institutions. But what India needs at the moment is a credible fiscal push. Whether it is in terms of structural reforms or whether it is in terms of something on the domestic demand for the lower end of the population.
Tanvi has put the ball in the court of the chief economic advisor. Let me come to you. Sir, you've been talking about keeping the powder dry. Do you believe now is the time? I personally know that finance ministry at one point of time was looking at various issues and various options, including consumption vouchers. Has that found, takers in the government at this point of time? Can we see some sort of a push coming in ahead of, the upcoming Diwali? We can't hear you.
Yeah, sorry. Firstly, let me just quickly clarify, what Tanvi was saying. I think, when you look at the indicators, right, we're looking at on a Y-on-Y basis. So, the festival season and seasonality in demand, is taken into account when you look at it on a Y-on-Y basis. So, and this concept of pent-up demand, I don't know what it really means. It basically, if things are down, it will come back, and that's what basically a V-shaped recovery really means. Once you're back to to previous levels and you're comparing on a Y-on-Y basis, then I think you're statistically doing fine. Now, your important question. I think given the way the macros are looking, especially the current account balance, almost $20 billion of a current account surplus in the first quarter, which is almost 0.7% of annual GDP. Even if basically from Q2 to Q4, if we have half of that performance, we actually will very likely be in a surplus. And one of the most important macro identities is that your private sector savings plus the public sector savings is equal to your current account balance. So in some sense, therefore, the savings that are coming in from the foreign savings that are coming in are providing fiscal space. This is added to that. There's also, of course, also capital flows that are coming in, and I do believe that a demand side push would be actually optimal at this stage, because as I've actually also mentioned earlier, in the Indian context, when you look at debt sustainability is driven a lot more by growth than by fiscal deficit. The other point I think which is important to remember is that from a macro perspective, if you look at emerging markets, the usual phenomenon when things actually become problematic on the macro side is from the overheating of the economy. In that context, the COVID crisis is very different, because it's not a case of overheating for emerging markets, possibly of underheating, and therefore there is the opportunity for using the fiscal space that is coming in through the foreign savings to create the short-term bridge. As I said, I think what I would hope that all our viewers and analysts actually do factor in is the medium to long-term prospects, given the reforms that have, yes, I do understand, having worked in the financial sector, most of us are focused on year-end bonuses, and, so things work therefore from year to year. But I think the long run is very important. So we should be looking to provide that short-term bridge. And there, I think the foreign savings can indeed provide that space to bring back demand, in an even more robust manner.
Sonal, if I can come to you, the Chief Economic Advisor is making a point that the government has tried to create short-term bridges during this point of time. But do you think that's going to be enough to get people back to the markets? Because at the end of the day, if there are demand issues that we will see maybe post the festive season, there's something that needs to be done to address that challenge as well, right?
So I think, Ruchi, the fact of the matter is that nobody knows how the pandemic is going to play out. So, the next 6 months are essentially a function of how COVID-19 plays out. It could be positive, it could be negative, we don't know. Now, to the extent that we know that the contact-intensive services will remain weak, those are sectors that would still sort of require policy support. I think we need to remember that India was slowing before the COVID-19 hit us. And that is something that you have to take into account. The entire twin balance sheet problem, becoming a triple balance sheet problem because of the NBFC issue is something that we were dealing with when the pandemic hit us. So I think from the government standpoint, I would completely agree with Dr. Subramaniam. I think the focus on structural reforms, the labor market, agriculture, infrastructure, getting the global value chains to get into India, absolutely the right things to do. My concern, I would say, would be on two fronts. One is because we have a triple balance sheet problem already, and the COVID-19 ultimately is a cash flow shock. Are the balance sheets strong enough to sustain, or will, whether it's a company or a household, will they be more in a balance sheet deleveraging mode? How long will the financial sector take to be able to provide the kind of support that is necessary to hold up this growth recovery? And third, I think also, if you do take a medium-term perspective, one consequence of COVID-19 has been a number of countries are actually turning more protectionist. And there is intense competition in terms of attracting these value chains that are moving out of China. It is great that India is making an effort to get not just electronics, but more other sectors come in. But I'm saying that the global perspective, the global outlook is also a bit more protectionist in this environment. So I think the balance sheet issues from a more medium-term perspective, how long it will take both for the private corporate sector and the banking sector to be ready to start running, because there is definitely potential in the country. But when will they be ready to start running to fire up the growth momentum? I think that is the key question.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I will be talking about the financial sector as well as the balance sheet issue in just a while from now. But let me get the Chief Economic Advisor in on that. So talk to us about the financial sector challenges. You have been talking about it for a very, very long time. Do you think the time is ripe for getting a bad bank? It's been spoken about as well in the past. Do you think now perhaps is the time that we need to support our banking system, our NBFC system a little more?
Ruchi, I will definitely, speak to that. But first, I want to clarify, this comment that Sonal made, and I hear that a lot, which is that, oh, the economy was slowing down before the, the COVID pandemic, the Q1. I've written an article in the Indian Express explaining this, again, using not peddling opinion, but actually providing, careful evidence on this. If you look at the way the numbers were in the month of February, and also take all the high frequency indicators, look at the mobility data, Google mobility data. For instance, in the month of March, mobility in India was down 20% compared to Jan-Feb levels. So COVID actually hit, India in the month of March, and you all know how important the month of March is the last month of the financial year. So the 3.1% that you look at, actually, that's what makes a lot of people say, oh, this was slowing down. I think it's important to unpack that, open the hood, and look at what was happening till the month of February. And I would urge Sonal to go and take a look at the article where I've clearly shown the trend, in the high frequency indicators. So I think to associate, what is happening on COVID, the decline, which itself is because of the lockdown, with what was happening before, I think is not quite right. I do agree with Sonal that on the, the point that he's making relating to the slowing down of the economy and the financial sector, that is well taken, because even before the pandemic, it was the case that, our banks were not lending enough, even though demand was there, so we had supply side problems. That is something which actually is, that nuance is something which is very important. That overall, to say that, that the slowdown basically this is just a continuation of that trend is incorrect. But the financial sector aspect, I do agree with you. Now, here I do think that maybe there is a debate to be had on the bad bank aspect. So I have maintained that it's important to address the incentive issues. We do have these ARCs. The reason that the loans do not get sold to the ARCs is because we do not have a market where prices get discovered. And whether it's a bad bank or an ARC, they require capability to restructure, number one. And number two, actually, the valuation has to be so that the bad bank can actually, for the risk that it takes, the returns are commensurate. These are incentive aspects that have to be thought about. Without addressing those incentive aspects, I do not think just the ARC versus the bad bank will definitely help matters. So these are aspects that we have to think about. Similarly, for instance, if you look at the United States, a lot of bad debt gets addressed through distressed funds, which are finite vehicles, for a 6-7 year period, and that's what works. Something that we don't have. So the ecosystem of some of this is important to consider. I am not sure that the bank is a silver bullet that will address all these aspects, which is really critical. Lastly, I think, on the financial sector, it's really important to keep in mind that, and I've said this umpteen number of times, we said it in the economic survey as well, our banking sector is like the 1990s cricket, which used to do very well in India, but it had nothing to know of note, globally. In contrast, the cricket teams have moved on. A Dhoni or a Ganguly has actually, helped in the cricket team notch victories overseas as well, which is what our banking sector should be looking at. For the 5th largest economy, the banking sector punches way below its weight. And that is something that the banking sector should look at as an opportunity, look at in implementing technology, even for large corporate lending, data, etc., private sector banks for retail lending, but not for large corporate lending. This is something that needs to be really focused on.
As we talk about the financial sector in detail, you've raised a lot of good points there. But Sonal, you wanted to come in on the point that the chief economic advisor was making on the economic data and whether India was slowing before COVID or not.
I just thought, I should also be more specific about the comment that I made. So clearly, 2018, if you look at the average growth was above 7%. And by the end of 2019, growth was closer to 5%. And that is the slowdown that I'm referring to. And clearly the global slowdown and the tighter financial conditions unleashed because of the NBFC problem, in my view, led to the slowdown. So that's basically where I was coming from.
Just to, I think, add, Q4, the 3.1% would have been much higher if, for instance, just a thought experiment, if COVID had hit India, let's say, in the month of May or April, the month of March, if we had actually, not had, I can definitely tell you, looking at the high frequency indicators, we would have in fact arrested that decline in the growth. You would have actually had a much higher growth. So that's these are counterfactuals.
Okay, but besides that, let me get Tanvi in on that. Tanvi, you've been having a good laugh at this, at this debate. But having said that, I want to understand from you in terms of, one of the risks for India to get back to its normal potential uh, is, of course, what's happening with our banking system. The RBI itself is saying that there is a possibility that the gross NPAs may double to almost about 14%. Besides that, we're seeing extreme judicial activism. That's taking place in the courts as well, on the back of which the Apex Court has now said that and asked banks to not term some of their loans as NPAs till they come out with a verdict on the loan moratorium issue. I want to understand from you, what do you think is the need of the hour at this point of time to make the Indian banking system strong? It's been a problem that we've been dealing with for far too long.
Yeah, Ruchi. So first of all, I would say in terms of potential growth, we looked at the numbers recently and we were pleasantly surprised that the potential growth for India is still in the range of 5.75 to 6.25. Yes, it has slowed from 7% plus, which we had a couple of years back, but it has not really gone down drastically. So I think a 6% growth is still one of the best in BRIC economies that we see, especially the countries which we are covering. That said, we know about the balance sheet concerns that Sonal was highlighting, and we do understand that during a year of a COVID shock kind of situation where Indian economy could be seeing a worst ever recession ever, the balance sheet concern can really lead to severe economic challenges. And for us, the financial sector is a key, because if the financial sector is not sound, stable, recapitalized, it's very difficult to get the growth which is credit funded back. So what we are seeing right now is that whether a corporate, whether you're a bank, everyone seems to be raising money from abroad, and they are not really going to the banking sector because they think that the banks are risk averse to lending. The banks are sitting with a deposit base of 10 to 12% YOY growth in deposit. The credit growth continues to remain weak at 6% year on year. Now, versus where we were in April versus where we are now, we think that the tail risk related to the banking sector has eased off. So we are not as worried about the banking sector what we were. We are not talking about a structural problem in the banking sector, but the tail risk related to the COVID-19 shock, which we thought will be on the bank's balance sheet, at least at UBS, our banking team is now less worried because of whatever measures the RBI has been able to take. That said, I think the two big reforms as an economist, I think the financial sector needs. One, we need to recapitalize the PSU banks or need to do some reforms about it. When we're saying 70% of the banks in India are PSUs, only SBI is well capitalized. Rest, most of the other banks need capitalization buffers. That is something which has been pending forever. And second is, the general banking sector reform. So even when an appointment is made in a PSB versus a private sector bank, why is it government linked? Why is it not directly directed by the RBI in terms of who is getting, appointed? Why is appointment not competition based? Why the pay scale not competition based? Why it is not attracting enough talent to be able to have a complete transparency in the way of doing things? Otherwise we have never would have seen the higher NPA problem which we are seeing right now, or which we did see, and there was a lot of cleaning up happening. So there is a confidence issue in the banking system. They need recapitalization, or they need to create capital buffers, and we need enough reforms, complementary reforms, for help have the credit impulse back into the economy.
Let me get the CA in on that. Given the fact that we have been talking about privatization, that's been a long standing call for banks as well. And you yourself have said that for India, which is the fifth largest economy in the world, we don't have banks that can really take the load of the Indian economy. Having said that, every time we want to privatize, for example, what happened about 2 years ago when we wanted to privatize IDBI Bank, ultimately we ended up selling it to LIC. Why is the government not being able to walk the talk on critical reforms in the financial system, for example, privatization?
I think that's an excellent question, Ruchi. Banking sector, of course, as you would understand, because of the 50 years of bank nationalization, there is a very strong set of arguments that people also make, saying, oh, if you have a private sector banking system like the United States, look the number of failures that happened in the during the global financial crisis. I do not subscribe to those, but that's a wrong interpretation that often gets made, saying you had so many bank failures. With government-owned banks, you don't have bank failures. It's a different matter that the taxpayer has to then keep funding the losses. So the history, the 50 years of history, and the global financial crisis itself, I think, has basically made the argument not as easy to make, compared to the period before the financial crisis. And I have, for instance, made this comment that when you look at private sector banks, it's not as if private sector banks have not had difficulties, but there's an important difference, which is the problems in the public sector banks are systemic, while the problems in the private sector banks are idiosyncratic. And this is basically what economists use, saying something that is it common across the entire system versus is it something that is affecting a specific institution. So I think that realization is extremely important, that with the public sector banks, what we have is a systemic issue. And this is also something that Dr. Rajan and Viral Acharya's, their paper also says this very clearly, and something that we had highlighted in the economic survey as well. For instance, if you look at the performance of the public sector banks, look at the distribution, it turns out that even the worst performing private sector bank oftentimes is actually better than among some of the best performing public sector banks. So I think we need to have a debate based on actual evidence and data rather than emotion on these aspects. And in which case, I think we will see the case that there is a need for relooking at this. A last point I'd actually say, on the issue of potential growth. I would remind everybody that 3 years, during the Asian financial crisis, 2000, 2001, 2002, 3 years we had a growth of 3.8%, 4.8%, and 3.8%. In other words, 12 quarters, we had growth of about 4%. That actually did not really affect our potential growth, because after that, when we did the reforms, we focused on infrastructure, we had 8% plus growth. The reason I bring this up is because oftentimes we are affected by saliency bias. We take too much, put too much weightage to the recent evidence. We should keep in mind actually what happened in the Asian financial crisis in that episode. 12 quarters of declining growth, and yet India went back to 8% plus growth. So do factor that in when you talk about potential growth.
Do you think, sir, that the fact that the kind of reforms that we've seen in the last couple of days, including the agriculture reforms, the labor reforms, will make us poised to getting to a better rate of growth? Is that, in fact, you've been talking about these reforms in your economic survey as well. Do you think now this will help us realize what our true growth potential is?
I think so. One key constraint that I will mention, it's the financial sector. If you were to ask me what is the biggest constraint, I would say it's the financial sector. And I definitely support reforms actually in the financial sector, because, if we can take care of the short term, and I say short term, I'm just talking about this year, for instance, let's say, and, reform the financial sector, then we'll be really well positioned to take advantage of all the reforms that are happening. Because if you look at the thematic aspects that are underlying these reforms, there are, 3 key aspects. One, if you look at the Indian economy, it has typically been one where the services sector has dominated, the tertiary sector. The primary and the secondary sectors have not gotten as much attention, and they create far more jobs, which is your agriculture and manufacturing. The current set of reforms are focused on really strengthening these 2 sectors, which will bring employment and thereby also, end up creating demand. And for instance, the labor reforms will enable firms to actually become bigger, even the MSME definitions, etc. So these are one key aspect. Second, if you look at the reforms, they are actually about enabling more markets. And that is something which we really showed in the economic survey, that by combining the invisible hand of markets with that of trust, which is transparency, etc., that's how you generate prosperity. And the final aspect is that this is about reducing state intervention as well, whether it's the Essential Commodities Act or the APMC Act or the privatization agenda that has been mentioned. So these are the three key themes which will have an impact on productivity and thereby on potential growth as well.
Right. Sonal, if I can get you in on that, we are seeing a whole host of reforms that the government has undertaken in the last couple of months. The labor reforms aimed at getting in more investment into the country. Apart from that, agriculture reforms as well. But on the other hand, you have certain states that are saying that they will do whatever it takes to not implement these reforms. How big do you think is going to be that challenge, in terms of realizing the true potential that these reforms can help the economy to get at?
Well, Ruchi, I mean, the strategy, there will always be challenges. We are facing certain implementation challenges, but that definitely should not deter us from doing what we need to do. I think, like I said earlier, what the government is doing in terms of setting in place the enabling structure, the right investment climate for long-term money to come in is the right one. We definitely are a supply side constrained economy. I mean, the kind of inflation increase we've seen due to the pandemic actually clearly also suggests that supply side constraints, if we can address these supply side constraints, I think through a greater focus on infrastructure spending, which creates both demand and addresses supply, I think that's the second thing that'll be extremely positive. The third, the global opportunity right now is very much on capturing some of these global value chains coming in. And I think what the government has done in terms of these production-linked incentive schemes, combined with the right investment climate and infrastructure, I think the vision is the right one. As long as we ensure it's executed well in time, because there is aggressive competition. I mean, Indonesia's just implemented this omnibus bill where they are also reforming their labor markets and taxes. So there is intense competition. And fourth, I think other than these structural supply side reforms, the challenges that are very much there, the medium-term challenges, the financial sector issues, and the balance sheet issues. I guess the balance sheet issues will take time to get resolved, but the financial sector issues here and now, I think a combination of addressing the supply side and addressing the demand side aspect, and by demand side I actually mean the financial sector related challenges head on, I think has to be the strategy right now.
Right. Tanvi, if I can get you in on that, we've seen in the last couple of months the government undertaking a whole host of reforms, a big push coming in for Atmanirbhar Bharat as well. Also the government's commitment towards infrastructure spending. The idea, of course, at this point of time is to optimize, this opportunity that we have to gain market share globally in the global supply chains as well. Of course, the idea is to, ensure that we are able to get to a medium-term growth level as well. But how important is going to be the implementation to get all these reforms going?
So just to add, I want to share one interesting data point. So we do these UBS Evidence Lab surveys, and the latest survey we did in April. And, we all know that there is a protectionism wave which has gone up, but we were quite surprised that when we spoke to China CFO, North Asia CFO, as well as US CFOs, we realized that 60% of China CFO, 83% of North Asia CFO, and almost 86% of US CFO did indicate intention or relocation incentives to move out of China. So definitely, and when we try to see which are the countries in Asia which looks most attractive if you want to relocate out of China, we realize that after Vietnam, India is coming as one of the second most preferred country. And this I'm only talking of the Asian economies. So in that sense, I guess there's a huge opportunity which is at our disposal. But that we also need to be able to optimize on this opportunity, because we do understand India from a medium-term perspective has the biggest challenge of creating jobs, both in terms of quality as well as quantity. So if I look at whatever reforms the government has announced, for example, labor market reform, which was like 29 labor central laws being subsumed into 4 courts, 12 had already been done since 2014. Second is the long-standing farms bills, which I think is a brilliant reform if we are actually able to implement it on the ground, because this will need government intervention. Just saying the farmer can sell it to anyone and anywhere is definitely halfway, because the government needs to create that infrastructure, government needs to create those markets. Plus the production linked incentive scheme, which so far it is only limited to electronics and pharmaceuticals. Hearing that the idea is that it should be expanded over 10 identified sectors, which is mostly talked in media. If I look only in terms of electronics, I would say the net electronic deficit has gone down since the production linked incentive scheme was launched. Especially if I look at simple smartphones, imports as well as exports, from less than $1 billion export of smartphone, India is exporting right now around around $3 to $4 billion of smartphones. So definitely we have seen that over a period of 3 to 4 years, if the government is able to identify the sector, is able to offer the kind incentives, the right incentives in terms of ease of doing business ranking, in terms of production linked incentive, cutting a corporate tax rate cut was again a brilliant reform. At this right situation, you could see manufacturing shift coming back to India. But again, implementation is the key, because we have seen in India, there's always a gap between announcement and implementation. So while, as Sonal was saying, the vision is very nice, we are looking at implementing these reforms which the government is announcing is what will lead to a higher potential growth. So can India move back to 7% plus growth? Definitely yes. But just thinking of it without doing it on the ground looks a very hard task ahead. So I would say the government vision is pretty good. We have seen a lot of turnaround in the reform momentum. But I guess the biggest challenge is going to be the implementation challenges. And
yeah, let me get the chief economic advisor in on that. The problem, of course, here in India is that we've committed to reforms. We in fact walk the talk on a lot of reforms, but implementation, there's always a slip between the lip and the cup. How will you ensure that there is, the implementation happens in a proper way? Because that's going to be important. And Sonal was also pointing out that there are other countries that are also undertaking a lot of reforms. So how do you make sure that India also is able to compete on a level playing field?
I think these are very good points, Ruchi, that Sonal and Tanvi are making. What I will say is it is not just about now, but even if you take the 1991 reforms, the reforms that happened, in 2000, 2001, when the, small scale sector, for instance, was liberalized, reservations were removed, and now the seminal set of reforms. Doing the reforms is the necessary condition. Implementing them is a sufficiency condition. We should not be confusing the two. Without the necessary condition, the sufficiency conditions can never be fulfilled. So while I certainly acknowledge that the sufficiency implementation is important, it was actually important even in 1991, it was important in 2001, 2002 as well. But please do recognize, and I think, Anant Nageshwaran wrote a very nice article saying, let's acknowledge as well that, when the necessary conditions are fulfilled, don't just move the needle right away saying, oh, now the sufficiency conditions. First, acknowledge that there is actually a huge amount of political will that has been brought together to do seminal reforms. And actually, of course, we do recognize that the implementation is so important because so much political capital has been invested, and it is in our own interest to take care of the implementation as well as possible, because that is the easier job in some sense, because the political capital in this actually is far harder. Now, the second point about competition, I think there what we need to understand is the vision behind the Atmanirbhar Bharat package. Here's where India is different from some of the other countries that that are being talked about. Our biggest strength, which we've so far not utilized, China has done it very well. We've not done it. Is that we have a huge, population and potentially huge demand. That's one aspect we've not tapped into as yet. It's a real strength which actually has left, has lied dormant. And that's where the Atmanirbhar Bharat package comes in, because so far, if you look at the business models that a lot of corporates have followed, it's been a margin-based model where focused on the top 25-30% of the income pyramid. But a country like India, with our population, it actually makes sense to also have volume-driven models which are focused at the bottom of the pyramid, microfinance or the FMCG sector, where you can actually go and buy a sachet of shampoo are very good examples. So the Atmanirbhar Bharat package is one of actually really utilizing that demand, something that actually other countries cannot offer, and combining those, that demand with the reforms that we're doing, I think we can provide a compelling proposition which cannot be matched by other economies.
Sonal, would you agree with the argument that the chief economic advisor is making, given the fact that, the prime minister himself has given a clarion call for Atmanirbhar Bharat? There is enough opportunity for us to explore within India itself rather than, looking outside.
Well, I think we should compete on both the sides. Why should we restrict ourselves only to the domestic market? What we have seen, Ruchi, so far in terms of these entire global value chain relocation is the benefit to India is, as of now, largely in the electronics cluster. Could be because of the government schemes, could be because we are a large market, or a mix of both, or in the auto industry. As far as the lower value added or rather low cost products are concerned, it is, and of course I mean all your garments and leather and other products, it is largely Vietnam, Cambodia, Bangladesh that are actually benefiting. So I think given our population, we need to target all brackets of potential relocation rather than just the electronics cluster. So I think that's one key area where we still need to take advantage of. The second point I would make is, if we want to be competitive in the global market, we should, the challenge I face is if we need to have protection for domestic producers to be competitive, then how will we compete in the global markets? Because, implicitly then it is telling us that, for whatever reasons, we need protection to be able to compete in the global market. So my view is we should be targeting both domestic and the global market. The spectrum of products in which we should be targeting to make India more competitive and where we can gain market share are actually a lot more than we are currently targeting. And I think the strategy to actually achieve both is the same, which, like I said, it has to be about, your investment climate, infrastructure, and the aggregate package that boils into this definition of, competitiveness.
So let me clarify.
I'll just a while. Let me get Tanvi in on that, and then I'll give you time, sir, to clarify on these issues. Tanvi, do you believe we've been very myopic in what we're targeting at this point of time in terms of the global supply chains?
So just to add to that, yes, what we are targeting as of now is obviously very myopic, and that the list of items or the list of production linked incentive or the manufacturing base definitely needs to be expanded significantly and sufficiently. The biggest challenge, as I was highlighting, is job creation. And if you look at the way our employment condition in India is, almost close to 58% of the population is still indirectly employed in agriculture. So when we are talking about manufacturing shift, we are talking about global supply chain shift. What India needs to target is a big scale manufacturing push, whether it means a production linked incentive scheme, whether it means further ease of doing business ranking getting improved, whether it means coming out with a massive infrastructure spending push. We know that there is a plan of spending $1 trillion in infrastructure spending, but we all also do realize the fiscal position the government is in. So automatically, when there's a COVID-19 shock and your fiscal condition is anyway tight, how are you going to spend it? And if the entire idea or the goal pass takes another 2 years or 3 years or 4 years to get implemented, this can actually, challenge the entire efficacy of these global supply chain shift. That's an opportunity right now, which we need to optimize right now. So just to add to what, what we are doing is right, but what we need in terms of pace of execution and implementation on ground, I think that needs a careful thought process and a working on the ground.
If you can come in on that now, sir.
No, I just wanted to clarify, Ruchi, that when I focused on the strength that we have in the domestic market, I was not implying at all that we should be only, to the exclusion of the external markets. In fact, in the economic survey, we talked about the network products and the global value chains as a significant opportunity for job creation. And, in general, and I agree with Sonal that actually eventually it is productivity that helps, in the domestic and on exports as well. And in fact, an export orientation can also help domestically because, global competition is extremely intense, and that helps. On the job creation part, I think some of the reforms that are being done will actually have an important impact on bringing more jobs into the formal sector and actually creating jobs. For instance, take the in the new labor laws, the threshold for for standing orders has been increased from 100 to 300. Now you would recall, Ruchi, that in the July 2019 economic survey, we had shown using the Rajasthan change that indeed increased the size of firms and created jobs as well. So, same thing can happen actually in the Indian context as well. Similarly, if you look at the change in the MSME definitions, now, one of the problems that we had, which was impacting productivity, was the phenomenon of dwarfism. The fact that, MSMEs would choose to remain small so that they could continue availing the government incentives. And therefore, we had the phenomenon of firms being small despite becoming quite old. Now, by changing these definitions and therefore, accommodating growth of these MSMEs, I think the economies of scale is being enabled, and that's one of the most fundamental ways in which productivity improvements are generated through economies of scale. So all these together actually will enable productivity improvements and job creation as well.
Right. Besides, the PLI schemes that we've already seen in the electronic space as well as mobile manufacturing as well, I was given to understand that there's much more that is being planned apart from what we've seen in pharma, mobile manufacturing and electronics. Which are the sectors that the government is actively looking to target? Like, for example, what Sonal was pointing out, we have a good advantage in terms of the textile sector, which we're clearly losing out to other countries. What is it that India is actually looking to target at this point of time in terms of PLI schemes?
Correct. No, I think, Ruchi, that's an excellent point. I do agree. The idea behind the PLI scheme is one of incentivizing growth. This is it's a phenomenon of incentivizing winners, and that is something that we really need in the export space. Because if you looked at the scripts that were being used earlier, that was basically just being democratized. There was no incentive for firms to really grow, become more productive. And that's the big change that has come through the PLI scheme. And, this is basically, it's showing encouraging signs in, electronics. And there is clearly a case for expanding it, to textiles, actually to network products, for instance. Medical equipment, something that has emerged a lot, in the COVID era, and a few other sectors as well that we've actually, my office has done some identification of these sectors. These are 6 sectors we've identified, including these, which can really help. Automobile manufacturing, for instance, another where there's a lot of opportunity. So we are indeed actually looking to scale this up. And in fact, that's something which I would mention, that there is potential for this Atmanirbhar Bharat push to actually change the macro fundamentals of the economy. Because, if on the one hand are some of the imports that are not as necessary, let's say, they can go down and exports can go up, then we might actually be in have a sustainable current account surplus, which will then enable also investment. Foreign savings will enable investment. Our investment rates can go up, and it's also seen that as growth comes, then domestic savings also increase. So it's an effort to try and really trigger this virtuous cycle and thereby, bring jobs and growth.
So must ask you, Mr. Subramaniam, we've spoken about Atmanirbhar Bharat, reforms, where India is headed in terms of growth as well. But in just about, a week from now, you'll get into the budget making exercise. From the 16th of October is when the budget making process will actually kickstart. I want to understand from you in terms of policy priorities, given the fact that we also spoke about a whole host of uncertainties that lie ahead of us. What will be the policy priorities?
I think right now, it's important to, given that we've actually done these really important reforms, which, can have an important impact on the, on the productive capacity and the productivity itself going forward. That's something which we've actually taken care of in the medium to long term. So the priority right now has to be to ensure that the short-term bridge with minimal damage, due to the COVID is actually ensured. I think that has to be the most important priority, so that we can actually, focus on bringing back some demand, which will also reduce some of the problems in the financial sector, because that will bring back credit as well, and the impact on NPAs, etc., would be lower. So the focus has to be on ensuring that we actually, utilize some of the space that has been provided through the current account surplus to provide a fiscal push and thereby create the short-term bridge, and also on the financial sector. I think I would identify those two as primarily the key issues, the demand side push and the financial sector, so that we can really utilize the measures that we've taken, seminal measures that we've taken to growth.
Since you're talking about a demand side push, before I let you go, are we going to see any sort of tax breaks? It's too much to ask for, given the fact that we do know that in terms of our tax collections, we're pretty constrained this time around. But when you're saying demand push, what is exactly can we look at, without going into, of course, the details of it? What kind of booster shot can we expect for the economy, for individuals? Because if you see at this point of time, while we did a lot for the bottom rung, the people who are, the middle class, actually something is a class that's still waiting to get any sort of help from the government at this point of time.
So Ruchi, I think, you've asked me this question, on earlier occasions as well. And I have mentioned that unlike in the United States and United Kingdom, where a large section of the population, pays taxes, in India, that is not the case. I think we have to keep that in mind. Therefore, the impact of a tax cut on consumption is something, we have to let the data tell us. And the data tells us that is not the section that really enables consumption that much. What is important though is, especially in the context of COVID, is durable income, sustainable income. And that's where employment comes in, because, what we are seeing is, and I've mentioned this earlier, the precautionary motive to save. For instance, payment balances had increased significantly by about 25,000 crores during the lockdown. Even now, the balances have come down about 12,000 crores, higher compared to March, which is reflecting your precautionary motive to save, because this is typically a constituent of the population where the marginal propensity to consume is almost close to 1. They end up spending 100% of their income, and yet you're seeing savings and deposits increasing in the banking system. So what is important, therefore, is to actually reduce the uncertainty on the incomes. And for that, actually, jobs is quite important, because if people know that they are assured of their income for maybe the next 1 or 2 years, that will motivate them to go and consume more. And that, I think, is a point of emphasis.
Just about 10 more minutes to go. Sonal, if you can come in on what should be the policy priorities for the government. We've spoken about, what they need to do in the medium term, but in the short term, as we're coming out of COVID, even though we still don't have a vaccine, what should be the policy priorities for the government in the next budget?
Well, I think, as the CEO was saying, continuing to provide that bridge. So, the bridge could be to households in terms of income support. It could be in terms of providing or rather sharing some of the cost burden for firms in sectors which are going to be the last ones to recover, ensuring there's enough credit that is available to those firms to stay afloat. It also means ensuring that lack of capital does not become a reason for banks to become even more risk averse than they are. Finally, I think clearly an infrastructure push is necessary. And, if we can address issues around, land and other stuff, there is, as the CA was saying, sufficient domestic saving. I mean, we can issue domestic tax-free bonds and raise funding from retail investors, given banks are clearly giving a lot lower in terms of return. That could be used, can be designed products in order to tap longer term funding from global investors, given there is clearly this lower for longer message that has also come from central banks like the US Federal Reserve. So I would say these are essentially, a few things to prioritize. And finally, since, we do have the CEA here, one thing that I think would also help, and this is more, when we talk about certainty, I think the fiscal side is one aspect where definitely we could do more with terms of certainty, in terms of where we are on the fiscal side, what is the actual impact, and what's the medium-term path on the fiscal side. I think clarity on that, since we are talking about the budget, I think just the broader certainty on the fiscal side would also help reduce the market risk premium.
Been speaking a lot to the 15th Finance Commission as well. They're supposed to put out their report in just a while from now, by the end of this month actually. And there's a case that is being made for a range in terms of fiscal deficit as well. Is that something that we could look at perhaps in the next budget?
I think it would be premature for me to comment on something that is still not presented, Ruchi. What I will say is that building on Sonal's point, and Sonal herself has actually mentioned that there is a lot of uncertainty. Given the pandemic, the way it evolves, actually that could affect economic activity and thereby revenues, and so the fiscal, math as well. So while we do certainly recognize, the importance of certainty, the inherent uncertainty of this period is also something that we cannot, unfortunately, do anything about, and that's the reality. I will say though that actually the emphasis on trying to get the vaccine in large numbers, to a large section of the population will be very important in reducing that uncertainty, and I think that is something. The emphasis on that is very good, because eventually we will be back to normalcy when all of us, in our own lives, we can actually start resuming normal life, going to a movie or going on a vacation. That's what actually the economy is, a collection of individuals like us. So when we resume our normal life, the full throttle, the economy will also be back. So that uncertainty remains, and that is the reason why we're actually not able to provide further guidance, and I think that's the point that I wanted to actually mention.
Say the big two priority sectors that the government will actively look at in the next budget. One, of course, is going to be health, and the other one, infrastructure.
I think infrastructure is certainly very, very, very important, because again, when we look at the learnings from the period around the Asian financial crisis, right? What stood out was actually, we went to about 87% of GDP in terms of the debt. This is despite actually growth slowdown. There was a fiscal push that was provided, focused on infrastructure. And when you got growth back from 87%, the debt came down to 70%. And that is the important learning. If you look at in terms of the macro dynamic as well, debt dynamics, it is indeed growth, or in terms of the R minus G differential, the difference between the nominal rate of interest and the rate of growth. That is what affects, debt sustainability. So, I think it's really important to focus right now on doing the infrastructure push, because that's something that helped. We've done the reforms, so the other part, fiscal push, especially focused on infrastructure, I think will really help in taking care of that short-term risk.
Can be closing comments coming in from you on what should be the areas to focus on as the government now looks to push growth in the medium term, and of course the upcoming budget is going to be an important one to watch out for.
So I would say a lot has already been covered by Sonal and CA, but I would say 2020, if I look in terms of calendar year, has been a challenging year. We don't know 2021 by when we get the vaccination being available, but I would say from my point of view, as I think what we need is some income certainty, whether it's a rural economy or the urban employment. I think whether it's an infrastructure push which is needed, or some kind of temporary work employment opportunities are needed, or is it NREGA, which we did see massive scaling up in the initial few months, whether that trend needs to be sustained. Something on the employment and income uncertainty to, is something which is definitely needs to be the policy push going into next year.
Right. And this is going to be my last question. There's a question coming in from Tyagarajan only. He's saying what can be done to support the services sector, which are now the largest, which now have the largest GDP share in the economy, and a large number of professionals also that are associated in the services sectors. What is it that the government is looking to do for the services sector as well? They've been hit quite hard due to COVID-19 as well. If the CA can take this question.
Firstly, I think, Ruchi, if you look at the services manufacturing mix, right, world over, it's seen that, a growth in manufacturing sector helps the services sector as well, because a lot of the services are provided to the manufacturing sector. So some of the, the measures that have been taken on the, on the manufacturing sector side, I think will help. One of the, aspects that I think it's important to keep in mind is, when you have a particular sector which, let's say, has had a, 70–80% decline in demand, I think, and not just over, a few months, but maybe over a longer period, I think it's very difficult to sort of, to sort of take care of that, because if there's a 15–20% decline in demand, that is something that one can take into account. But 70–80% decrease in demand is actually far greater. And Tanvi, for instance, was saying that India is a consumption-driven economy. I'll add to that, actually, just look at the arithmetic of our GDP. If you take GDP as consumption plus investment plus government spending, net of transfers and your net exports, consumption and investment together account for almost 90% of GDP. In contrast, government spending net of transfers is about 10%. So if there is a 1% decline in consumption and investment, in order to make up for that, you need a 9% of GDP change in government spending. That is just the pure arithmetic that we have to keep in mind, when we talk about some of these sectors, especially those that have suffered a 70–80% decline in demand.
Right. Okay, guys, appreciate you all taking your time out. The Chief Economic Advisor, Tanvi Gupta, as well as Sonal Verma. Many thanks for joining in. With that, it's back to you, Mr. Dubash.